Maybe that's why we didn't make another album for such a long time. I hated the idea of delivering it to a deadline, and it was my own fault.
Robert Smith of The Cure has become one of the most recognizable figures in alternative rock music. His distinctive appearance, featuring messy black hair and smeared lipstick, along with his melancholic lyrics, made him an icon for an entire generation of music fans. Millions of people around the world admire him for his emotional honesty and dark, romantic style. However, behind the public image lies a more complicated story about his relationships with other musicians in the industry. Throughout his long career, Robert Smith has reportedly made some serious enemies in the music business. There are accounts of major stars who found it extremely difficult to work with him. Some musicians have described him as arrogant and impossible to collaborate with, while others claim he destroyed professional relationships that could never be repaired. These weren't just minor disagreements about how songs should sound. According to various sources, these conflicts involved clashes over egos, money, creative control, and even personal insults that cut deep. One of the most significant conflicts was with Simon Gallup, The Cure's longtime bass player. What makes the situation particularly interesting is that Simon wasn't just another musician or rival. He was actually Robert's closest friend and musical partner for many years. However, sources suggest that their relationship became toxic and explosive, creating drama that repeatedly threatened to tear the band apart. The first major problem allegedly occurred in 1982 during a European tour. People close to the band say Robert and Simon had a massive argument about control and creative decisions. Simon apparently felt that Robert was becoming dictatorial and ignoring everyone else's ideas. The confrontation became so heated that Simon quit the band immediately. Although Simon eventually returned to The Cure years later, the underlying tension supposedly never truly disappeared. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, people who knew the band claimed that Robert and Simon barely communicated outside of rehearsals. Their once close friendship had apparently died, replaced by nothing more than cold professionalism. The second departure was even more shocking. In 2019, Simon was suddenly fired from The Cure after nearly 4 decades with the band. The announcement stunned fans worldwide. Industry insiders suggested there had been a brutal argument backstage before this happened, where Simon allegedly confronted Robert about his behavior, and Robert responded by immediately removing him from the band. According to sources, Simon's hatred stemmed from years of being treated like a hired employee rather than a creative partner, despite his enormous contributions to The Cure's distinctive sound. Another major feud was reportedly with Morrissey, the legendary singer from the Smiths. Both Robert and Morrissey were considered kings of alternative sadness during the 1980s, so you might expect them to find common ground. Instead, sources indicate they despised each other with a passion that became very public and embarrassing for both. The conflict allegedly began with magazine interviews where both singers took shots at each other. Morrissey reportedly dismissed Robert's music as nothing more than wallpaper for depressed teenagers. Robert fired back by calling Morrissey pretentious and fake. These insults appeared in major music publications, and fans immediately began taking sides. The rivalry became one of the biggest stories in alternative rock at the time. Things apparently escalated when both bands were scheduled to perform at the same festivals. Backstage staff reported that Morrissey and Robert refused to be anywhere near each other. They demanded separate dressing rooms on opposite sides of the venues, and security received strict instructions to keep them apart. One stagehand supposedly described the atmosphere as resembling two rival gangs preparing for battle. Sources claim Morrissey constantly mocked Robert's appearance, making jokes about the lipstick and hair, calling it cheap goth costume. Robert allegedly responded by suggesting Morrissey was jealous because The Cure achieved greater commercial success. Music journalists eagerly reported on every new insult and comeback. The bad blood continued for decades, with both men making subtle digs at each other, even in recent interviews. Industry veterans say this wasn't friendly competition, but genuine dislike, rooted in ego and a desire for artistic superiority.
Bono from U2 also reportedly had issues with Robert Smith. Bono is famous for his humanitarian work in creating massive rock anthems, while Robert Smith represents the opposite approach with his focus on darkness, depression, and introspection. According to sources, Bono found Robert's entire persona annoying and self-indulgent, and he wasn't shy about expressing these opinions. The conflict allegedly began in the mid-1980s when both bands were climbing towards superstardom. Music journalists would compare U2's hopeful messages with The Cure's depressing themes. Bono reportedly gave interviews criticizing musicians who wallow in sadness for attention, and everyone understood he was talking about Robert Smith and bands like The Cure. Sources claim Bono told people in the industry that Robert's sad image was calculated marketing rather than genuine emotion. He allegedly argued that musicians should inspire people instead of dragging them down into darkness. When these comments got back to Robert, he was reportedly insulted and furious. Friends claim Robert viewed Bono as a fake who pretended to care about the world while actually seeking fame and glory. There's a story about an award ceremony where both musicians were present. Witnesses say Bono tried to approach Robert backstage, possibly to make peace, but Robert allegedly turned his back and walked away without saying a word. The public snub was noticed by everyone in the room, and Bono was reportedly both embarrassed and angry about the disrespect. Trent Reznor from 9 Inch Nails also had a complicated relationship with Robert Smith. Trent is recognized as a genius producer and pioneer of industrial rock. You might expect him and Robert to get along since they both explored dark themes in their music. However, sources suggest their relationship was filled with professional jealousy and creative competition that turned nasty. The problems allegedly started when 9 Inch Nails became huge in the 1990s. Suddenly, Trent was being called the new king of dark alternative music. Robert reportedly felt threatened by this younger artist taking his crown. Industry insiders claim Robert made dismissive comments about Trent's music being noise without soul. These remarks supposedly reached Trent through mutual friends. Trent allegedly responded by calling Robert's newer music outdated and irrelevant. Sources say he told producers that The Cure had lost their edge and were living off past glory. This generational battle became a hot topic in alternative music circles, with fans debating endlessly about who was the real master of darkness. There are reports about a proposed collaboration between the two that fell apart spectacularly. A major record label wanted Robert and Trent to work together on a special project. According to insiders, initial meetings went horribly wrong, with both men allegedly trying to dominate the creative direction and refusing to compromise. The project was canceled after just 2 meetings. Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees had particularly explosive accusations against Robert Smith. She's a punk and goth icon who influenced countless artists. The serious claim is that Susie allegedly accused Robert of stealing her style and building his career on her innovations. This wasn't a small accusation, but a direct attack on his originality. The backstory is crucial here. Robert actually played guitar for Susie and the Banshees in the early 1980s. He toured with them and appeared on their albums. Sources suggest this is where Robert learned about gothic aesthetics and dark performance styles. Then he allegedly took those ideas back to The Cure and became a superstar. Susie was reportedly furious about this development. Industry insiders claim she felt used and betrayed. She allegedly told friends that Robert took everything she created, including the look, the attitude, and the stage presence, and got more famous with it. Music journalists began asking uncomfortable questions about who influenced whom. Things apparently got really ugly when Susie gave a magazine interview specifically about Robert. She allegedly said he was unoriginal and lacked authentic punk credibility. She reportedly claimed his gothic image was borrowed from her without acknowledgement or respect. Robert responded by saying Susie was bitter about
Pearl Lowe, a musician and Robert's former girlfriend, represents a different kind of conflict because it was deeply personal rather than professional. Pearl allegedly saw a side of Robert that fans never knew existed, and years later she spoke publicly about their troubled relationship. According to reports, Pearl and Robert dated in the early days of The Cure. Sources say the relationship was intense, passionate, and ultimately destructive. Pearl allegedly experienced Robert's mood swings, jealousy, and controlling behavior firsthand. Friends from that era claimed the relationship was unhealthy for both of them. Years after they broke up, Pearl wrote about their time together. While she didn't always name Robert directly, insiders say the references were obvious. She allegedly described a relationship with a famous musician who was emotionally unavailable and often cruel. The descriptions reportedly matched Robert's personality and timeline perfectly. What made Pearl resent Robert, according to sources, was how he treated her during and after the breakup. She allegedly felt manipulated and emotionally damaged by the experience. Some of Robert's song lyrics were supposedly about their relationship, but Pearl claimed they twisted the truth and made her look bad. She reportedly felt exploited for his artistic benefit. The musician who allegedly hated Robert Smith more than anyone else is Pearl Thompson, and most casual fans don't even know who he is. However, sources say Pearl was there from the beginning, and what Robert allegedly did to him was unforgivable. Pearl Thompson was an original member of The Cure who played guitar and keyboards. According to band historians, Pearl helped create the musical foundation that made The Cure successful. However, as Robert became the face and leader of the band, Pearl was reportedly pushed further and further into the background. The breaking point came when Pearl was fired from The Cure in the late 1980s. Sources claim Robert wanted complete control and saw Pearl as a threat to his authority. The firing was allegedly brutal and unexpected, with Pearl receiving no warning and no real explanation. Industry insiders say Robert simply decided he didn't need him anymore. What made this betrayal even worse was what happened afterward. Pearl was reportedly written out of The Cure's history. Early band photos were cropped or excluded from official releases, and his contributions to classic albums were downplayed or credited to others. Sources claim Robert wanted people to believe The Cure was always his solo vision rather than a collaborative effort. Pearl did return to the band years later, but the damage was already done. Friends say he never forgave Robert for the humiliation and erasure. The second time around, Pearl allegedly stayed only for the money, not out of friendship. When he left The Cure for good in 2010, sources claim it was with relief and lingering bitterness. Music historians consider this Robert's biggest sin. Pearl Thompson gave years of his life to building The Cure, and he was allegedly rewarded with betrayal and being forgotten. The hatred Pearl reportedly feels toward Robert is profound because it's about more than just music. It's about being erased from something you helped create from the beginning.